What's up YouTube, and welcome back to another Procreate tutorial where today I'm going to guide you step by step through the process of creating this sunny tree design. Now, as always, there's a link in the description down below to the requirements which are available over on my Patreon, and there you'll find the canvas and the palette. All of the requirements are completely free and you should just need those two things because everything else is built into Procreate. Now, I want to ask you, are you subscribed to the channel? Because I know, looking at my analytics, that a lot of you are not subscribed and you may not even realize you're not. So please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below and show your support for the channel. And if you want even more tutorials from me, come and join me over on Patreon, where I post 3 more every single month to my Patreon supporters. And the catalogue sits at well over 120 exclusive tutorials at the time of recording. And when you join, you get access to every single one of them. And I can do you one better, and you can go to my website and check out every single tutorial design before you join, and that way you know that the content is for you or not. So make sure to check out both of those in the description down below. Enjoy today's tutorial and let's get started. So once you've created your canvas, the first thing we'll do is go up to our actions. We're going to go to the canvas tab and we're going to go ahead and add a drawing guide. Edit that drawing guide, and as always, set it to 1/4 of your canvas size, so 500 for me. So you just tap on grid size here and type in the number, and then you'll get your grid. You can just bring up the opacity if you want to something a bit about 50% and hit done. Now, why we use this is because then you can lay out your design and know roughly whereabouts I am actually in the canvas rather than guesstimating. Use my grid against your grid to work out where I position things. Now let's go ahead and go to our layer here. And on the empty layer here, I'm going to go to my colors and I'm going to go ahead and grab the middle color in the far right column, drag that onto the screen. And then I'm going to start adding in my hills in the background. So we're going to create a new layer. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab this color here, top of the 5th column. Your brush wants to be set to airbrushing and the soft brush. We're going to bring it nice and small, around about 1 to 2%. And we're going to draw in a piece of land that's going to roughly sort of run into around about, say, here. And it's going to make its way roughly up to, say, here, if not slightly higher than that. And then pretty much horizontal to that, if not slightly lower. So what you can do is you can just wiggle your pen through here, press nice and firm so that you get a good solid soft airbrush. And then we're going to come along the land and out to the right. It's not really critical that it looks any particular way, just drag and drop your color in. Then what we're going to do is add in some different color tones in here. Now I am going to go ahead and just very quickly just make that a little bit chunkier here in this little spot. I just want to add in some extra little details. Now let's go ahead and go to our layer. We'll tap on it. We will alpha lock it. So we can't paint outside of what we've drawn on this layer now. So if we go to our colors and we grab this middle color in that 5th column. So it's a little bit of a blue, 6 to 7%. We're just going to lightly towards the top edge introduce some light blue tone in there. Just towards the top only. Lovely. So a little something like this. Then go to your colors. We want to grab the next color down. So it's the 5th column, bottom color. And this is where we're going to start drawing in some trees. And they're going to be done so simply. You're going to amaze yourself here. So all you need to do with a 2 to 1% brush size, just wiggle your pen and just create these kind of dashes and kind of forest lines like this all the way along. And vary up your pressure if you can. Set it to, like, say 60%, so you can get some varying amounts of color in here. So we're going to wiggle in lots of different color tones, go right up to the very edge, but you're just trying to create those diagonal kind of lines all running down towards here. And then once you've done that, we're going to go to our colors and grab just the next column along, all of the colors in here. So we'll grab the top of the 6th column, wiggle some more colors in here. You can go right down towards the water's edge as well. So you can go a little something like this. You can get right up close to another color, layer it on top, really randomize it, but really, you know, change up all of your settings. Smaller brush size, 1% maybe, down to a smaller size, and vary up your angles as well, maybe a couple more vertical lines. This is going to get blurred, so all we're trying to do is just sort of nod towards the fact that there's lots of the edges of some of the trees in here. So we're just trying to add in some color tones to do exactly that. Then go to your colors again. We've got some more vibrant tones, but keep these to a minimum. So I'm going to go middle of the 6th column, brush size 1%, opacity I'm going to bring it down to 60 just so I can be in control of it a bit more. And I'm just trying to draw in some wiggly lines to draw in some tree-like aesthetics in here. Again, because in a minute this is going to get blurred, we're not going to see too much of it, and we just need to give a nod towards the fact it's a forest. And we're going to do this, by the way, for every single one of our background hills. So the sort of formula for it is going to be sort of worked out now. Then go to your colors and grab a yellow finally at the bottom of the 6th column and start wiggling that yellow in here. Focus the yellow though a little bit more towards the top edge. So like a few more yellow sort of streaks in there. Overlap some of your previous ones as well. Just a few more in here. Wiggly squiggly lines. And eventually, if you blur your eyes a little bit, this all becomes quite a dense forest already. But we're going to leave it like that. We're going to go ahead and first of all go to our smudge tool. We're going to tap on our smudge tool and go to the option of airbrushing and the soft brush. We will set the size to around about 1 to 2% again. We'll go to our layer, but we will tap on it and use the drawing assist. Now the drawing assist is this grid system we added. And what that means is I can only smudge now in a vertical or a horizontal fashion. You can't do anything in between. Now if we tap on our layer and we turn off the alpha lock now, what we'll be able to do is zoom in and just push up and create a bit of a forest-like shape to it. So 1%, 2%, vary it up. It really honestly doesn't matter. Just pushing up and letting your pressure get really light as you push up. You don't have to push very far either. I just want you to kind of break away that perfect shape that we had before of the soft airbrush. And now we're just trying to create an uneven treetop-like area here. And you can make some of these quite interesting. You can go up with a 2%. And just really push up some interesting kind of dark shapes, some light shapes. It's all depending on where you smudge from, but also vary it up on your size as well. Now, just down towards the end here, just let that get really, really small. We're not too interested in that area. Again, we've still got to blur this layer. So this is another detail that might get lost to a degree, but we're putting in the foundations, we're putting in the work now. Then it's really important to also just grab your like 1 or 2%. And then get into here and push up like a little bit of the darkness, push up a little bit of the color, just smudging it upwards now so that all of those colors and those squiggly lines will just get moved a little bit more. And you should be able to create a bit more of a formation happening in your lines. So I'm looking for a few things that are quite outliers almost. And you can smudge up. So for example, you can, wherever you press and push up, you're going to push that color up. Of course, if you press just below that, you're pushing the dark tone then over the top. So we're just looking to do a bit of both, to be honest with you. We'll push up a few colors so we get some nice vibrant tones, and then grab your shadow tone, flick that up and break down some of those shapes. And then again, always sort of remember to zoom all the way out, crunch it down into a really small size, because ultimately that's what you're going to end up seeing. And this is only background content, so we don't want to get lost in the details too much. We're just going to push up now. Now, the one thing you kind of want to make sure you do, though, is make sure you have gaps with shadows. So you don't want too much color everywhere. You do want to have some of your shadow tones sitting in there, breaking up all of those colors. It gives you a nice bit of contrast. So with that done, we can then go to our adjustments. We can go to Gaussian blur. We can swipe from left to right, and we can add in a 4% Gaussian blur. Tap on your adjustments when you're done. Again, zoom all the way out, and it should, in your mind now, be able to sort of give you the nod that there's a bit of a forest there. We're going to go ahead and move on to another layer. So we're going to tap on the layer below it, create a new layer so it's in position. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the top color now of the 4th column from the right. Soft airbrush again, still. Maximum opacity. Small size, 1 to 2%. Anything in there will do. And we're going to go ahead and run from here in behind our land like this. And then once you get down towards here, you need to remember where you let go, of course. So you can carry on your line and just allow that just to run up, creating a banked hillside over here off to the left-hand side, and drag and drop your color in. And the rules of this are exactly the same as what we did a second ago, except we've got less colors. So we're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the next color down, the middle of the same column. So middle of the 4th column from the right. Brush. You probably want to be around about low 2%, high 1 now. You don't want to go too large. And then we want to go ahead and tap on this layer temporarily and alpha lock it. So again, lots of squiggles, except vary it up now. Maybe create these kind of curled shapes here. Maybe it's like a nod to a rounded sort of shaped tree rather than kind of the pine trees almost. I love the pine trees, and I'm not too good, to be honest, at remembering all the different species. It's not really my thing that I need to remember necessarily, but in general, you've got rounded shapes of trees, haven't you? And then you've got the more pointed, upright, vertical ones. almost Christmas tree like silhouettes. But you can create all these kind of curved shapes in here. And also don't be afraid to like leave like an avenue, say like here, for just dark tones, just dark tones to live in there. That's fine. Again, vary up your brush size, a couple of smaller wiggles in there, vary up your opacity, really keep it nice and random, but similar kind of principle than what we did a second ago. So just a couple of wiggles in there. We've got another color to introduce in a second. I'm just going to go ahead and make the brush size a little bit bigger and add in some more over here. Again, I'm trying to sort of make my way down here, creating like a forest, the illusion of a forest, but also you can do things like this where you draw like one really rogue line in here, and then because we're getting further away, you might even be able to do this kind of technique where you just do lots and lots of dashes. We're definitely going to be doing that at the furthest hillside in a second. So for a minute, you might be able to do something like that. Then grab your color and grab the bottom of the same column, bottom of the fourth column from the right. And now we've got a slightly different hue in here now to introduce in here. And again, you can just follow suit if you want to. You can do all these little dash lines, but again, making sure you leave gaps for your forest. And in a minute, when we do the smudging anyway, you'll be able to fix it. So at this point, we're just laying out the background area, and then we can get into our main subject. I think based on how this one works with the lighting, we want to make sure we've got this all set in play to start with. Now let's go ahead and go to our layer. Let's tap on it and turn off the alpha lock. Let's tap on it and add the drawing assist. We'll go to our smudge tool, and we're going to do exactly the same as we did last time. Smudging it up on that top surface there. You can keep it nice and quick. You don't have to do too much here because it's a little bit further away, of course. You don't have to stress too much about the general shape of it. As long as you don't have too much of that soft airbrush aesthetic to it, you will have a nice broken down shape. You'll have something like this. Now let's go ahead and just continue like we did a second ago. A couple smudge lines up, and then just keep doing this. Now I've done this in a few tutorials recently, especially on YouTube. I did one as well, another forest lake river design, and similar principle really. I think if you're going to blur your background, you don't need to give it too much love. The blurring of the background's optional. It's just dependent on if you've got a really good subject matter in your design that you can go ahead and say, right, that's where I want people to look. So for this one, we can get away with it. And because we don't really want to also spend too much time on an element that's so far away from us, this just aids us massively. Now I'm actually going to go ahead and probably grab the base color, top of the fourth column from the right, and go back to my brush, because I think I can go ahead and turn off the drawing assist as well. I think I could go ahead and just wiggle my way through here and actually break down. I've probably added in a bit too much. So I'm just going to very quickly just wiggle my pen through there, just creating a few dark avenues. There we go, that's better. Then I'll go back to the layer, add the drawing assist again and the smudge. Sometimes I like to keep those types of things in the video because then you can also see what I'm looking for and then maybe even reflect that in your own work as well. Because just like you and anybody else, although you see the finished product here on YouTube and the final video, we make mistakes, but sometimes we'll redo them and you never see them. But sometimes I like to leave in little things like that because I want you to be able to see the things that I'm personally not thinking I like too much. Because I think that's educational. I know it could potentially be a bit frustrating to watch at times, but it can be educational, which is what this is all intending to be anyway. So once we've got our little forest shape again, we're going to go ahead and go to our adjustments. We're going to go to Gaussian blur, but because this is slightly further back than this one, it needs to be slightly more blurred. So we're going to go up to around about the 6%, and then I'm going to tap on my adjustments when I'm done. Got one more hillside to add in over here on the right. So we're going to go to our layers. We're going to create a new layer and drag it underneath both hills. We'll go to our colors and grab the top of the third column from the right now. Soft airbrush at 100% opacity again. We're going to draw in one more hill. It's going to roughly run to say like here, and it's going to run all the way up to there, go all the way around and through your shape so you can link up to where you started. So you create like a loop and drag and drop your coloring. And then we're going to go ahead and go to that layer. We'll tap on it. We will alpha lock it so we can't paint outside of it. We'll go to our colors. We'll grab then these two tones. So we're just going to grab the middle of the third column from the right. Your brush probably wants to now be probably solely around about the 1%. And you just want to do kind of this really. Just lots and lots of sort of diagonal lines, all kind of just showing how the hillside flows down towards You imagine that the river probably S-bends in there somewhere, so you can do that. The only thing I would say is you can make it a bit bigger and just triple check that you add in a good amount of color on, say, like the top edge here where the sunlight's probably brightening it up quite a bit. But make sure you always leave gaps again so that the shadows can have somewhere to thrive. You know, you've got all these gaps of your base color in there. I'm just gonna keep going, varying up the amount of the pressure that I give it, seeing what we can add. Let's switch our color then to the bottom of the same column, bottom of the third column from the right. Slightly brighter hue now. And again, we're gonna get in there on the top edge, brightening up those ones there. Let's imagine that this dense area I added here, I can just add in some brighter specks to the top edge of it. And again, leave these kind of areas here. I think this looks great. You just leave it, let it just be what it is. And then we're going to go ahead and tap on the layer. We're going to go ahead and turn off the alpha lock. We will add a drawing assist like we did last time. We'll go to our smudge tool, but we want to keep this nice and quick. So 1 to 2%. Let's go 1. And just a few little flick ups along there. I just want to break that down a little bit. The problem here is though, because this is slightly further away again, we actually will start to only end up with solid shape. So we don't want to blur this out too much. We don't want to be able to identify an actual tree back there. We don't want to smudge this up, should I say. So we just want to break up that top edge. I'm not going to go ahead and smudge any of that. I'm just going to go to my adjustments, Gaussian blur, swipe from left to right. Now we don't want to go too high. Last one was 6. I think we could go to 7 and then tap on our adjustments when we're done. And that gives us a bit more distance between them. Now we've done our hills. Let's go ahead and swipe from left to right on all 3 of those and group them together. We're going to rename the group and we'll call it hills. Now while we're here with just an empty sort of set of layers, we're going to go ahead and just do one thing. We're going to swipe to the left and duplicate it. We're going to tap on the top group and flatten it into one layer. So we've got one layer here. I just want to go ahead and go into the hills group, create a new layer. We're going to go ahead and tap on the layer outside that we created, the flattened one. Tap on it and select it. Now make sure color fill is grayed out here in the bottom left. You don't want to be seeing that as blue. And then all you want to do is go back to the empty layer in the hills group, tap on it and add a mask. So what it's going to do is, if I tap on my selection tool, you can see the mask matches the shape of that layer. So later on, when we need this layer, it's already done. So I can delete this layer here at the very top, and I've got this empty layer here ready and waiting for us. Now we are going to move on though. We're going to create a new layer and drag it underneath the hills group. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to grab the bottom of the second column from the right. And we're just going to use our soft airbrush again to draw a line all the way across the screen, in behind our mountains and hills, so we can drag and drop the blue into that bottom area. From there, we're also going to go ahead and create a new layer. Swipe from left to right on both, group them together, and of course, let's rename the group. We'll call it water. And the empty layer above. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the greeny tone in the middle of the second column from the right. We do want to go back to the layer though and tap on it and clipping mask it to the water, so that way the green won't spill out. I'm going to set the brush size a lot bigger than what we've been using currently, about 22%. And we're just going to go left to right here, just adding in a bit of this greeny tone here in the water. You can leave little gaps at the edges if you want, just like a little bit of that dark blue towards the edges. It'll add like a nice vignette to the screen, but you just want to make sure in the center here is nice and vibrant. Now while we're working on the water, let's go ahead and add in some reflections. So we're going to go ahead and open up our hills group. We want to go ahead and just isolate to this layer here. So this one here, the front hill. So I'm going to hold down on the tick here and it will turn off every layer but that one, and make sure you turn off your background color as well. And then that way you end up with just that hillside on its own. You can swipe down with 3 fingers, go to copy all, then go back to your layers, hold down on the tick and it will bring everything back into play. You can leave your background color off, it's fine because we added this layer here. Then in the water group, go ahead and create a new layer, tap away, swipe down with 3 fingers and go to paste. And it will now paste that hillside in. You can flip it vertically down here, drag it down so that the points of the land nicely touch, and then tap on your cursor when you're done. We'll just do the same quickly for the other hills. So we're going to go ahead and we need to go and turn off the layers above. So we'll turn off the hillside on the right, we'll turn off the reflection. We'll turn off every layer manually this time because we have to leave 2 layers in play, so that tick wouldn't work. So you should have just the far hill and this hill on the left. Swipe down with 3 fingers, go to copy all, go back to your layers, and then go ahead and turn on all the layers again that we need back in play. And then in your water group, tap on the green layer that you created, create a new layer, then tap away, 3 fingers down again and go to paste, and then flip that vertically and drag it down so that you get a nice little bit of a reflection. And then tap on your cursor when you're done. Now at this point, we want to go ahead and smudge them out. So we're going to go ahead and with the far hills that we just pasted in, we're going to go to our adjustments, motion blur. We're going to drag down in a vertical fashion until we smudge that out. And we're going to go up to, let's go to something a bit more extreme than that. I think I want to go down to around about, say, 35%. And then I'm going to tap away. And I'm also going to grab my cursor and just move it up again so that there's no gap in between them now. And tap on your cursor when you're done. Then go to this hill here on the right hand side in this group. Go to your adjustments, motion blur, drag down again, vertical fashion. And we want to just add in something less than what we did a second ago. So I reckon something around about 25%, and tap on your adjustments when you're done. Now it's at this point we start to work on the background and adding in the sun and the lighting effects. So a lot of these colors are going to change, but don't stress, it's intended. So we're going to go to our layers. We'll collapse water down, we'll collapse the hills down, and we're going to go to this layer here that we added with the big block of color. I'm going to create 2 new layers, swipe from left to right on all 3 of them, and then group them together, and we're just going to rename this and call it BG for background. So in this group, first of all, we want to start on the top layer. We want to change the blend mode from normal to the option of add. We want to go to our colors and we want to grab the middle of the far right column. And I'm going to set the brush size to 40%. Now, when we tap with the add layer effect, we want to tap roughly here, and I'm going to tap now and add in this lovely sunny glow. Now, I want to also go ahead and tap on the layer and probably bring the opacity down of that a little bit. We don't want to make it too heavy. So I'm going to drop mine to 60%. Yours may need to also go slightly lower than that. It's something that is completely dependent on how hard you pressed. So I could probably go higher, but it's just an advisory for you, just in case you don't want to blow out the sun too much. Now at this point, we then want to go to the other empty layer in this BG group. We want to go to our colors and grab the bottom of the far right column. We'll set the brush down to say 25% this time. And we're going to add in a lovely little bit of sky blue in the top right. I'm really light with my pressure. I'm just bringing in a little bit at the top of the frame there, and then reintroducing it back into the corners and kind of blending it in towards that lovely sunny glow. We want a bit of blue. It's a bit of a tricky thing to be quite bold with and brave with. So just take your time and just stroke after stroke there with the blue is just going to build it up nicely. But I urge you to probably do that a few times. Then what we want to do is we want to go into our hills group. So we'll collapse BG down. Now this empty layer that I got you to make with the mask on it, we now want to use that. So we're going to go ahead and making sure you're on this part here where my pencil is, not here. You want to be here. You want to go to your color and grab the top right of the palette. We want to grab our brush to around about, say, the 17% range. And it's just here that we want to go around in a kind of circular motion, just add in a bit of a fade out of some sunlight. Don't overdo it, but just a little something like this. Now it's at this point where we're really going to add the lighting that's going to really change this up quite a lot, because we need a lot of lighting coming from the back to make our tree stand out. So I'm going to create a new layer. I'm going to go ahead and change the blend mode of the layer from normal to the option of linear light. I'm then going to go ahead and go to my colors. I'm going to grab the color at the top of the second column from the right. Your brush wants to be fairly large at this point. I reckon around about 70 to 80%, if not slightly smaller. And then I'm going to go ahead and add in a big ray of sun from here. So I'm going to keep tapping a few times until we get essentially something like this. Now you can then tap on the layer though and bring the opacity down, of course. So we can bring it down, we can tone it down a little bit, but roughly that's what we want. So I'm going to bring it down to 60 because that's what I did in my initial practices. But that's just something to be aware of, that we can tone it down if we want to. Now we can now move into the front area and our main focal points. So we're going to collapse hills down. We're going to create a new layer. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to grab the color in the top left of the palette. We're going to go to our brush. We are going to go ahead and grab any brush that we want. I'm going to use the soft air brush still. I'm going to just keep with it and just set it down to a nice small size, about 1%. And I'm going to draw in my land, and it's going to roughly run onto this part of the guide here. So you can put a little dot there if you want, another dot, say over here, pretty parallel to it. And it's going to run up to a point roughly around about, say, there. And it's going to be slightly lower and closer towards us. So we can create this kind of triangular shape. So once you put your dots in, sometimes it's a little bit easier then to work out where you need to aim for. So I'm coming out of the water here, and then going to dip down, and then I'm going to create like a rocky kind of shape there. And then going to go up again in a bit more of a vertical fashion, and then I'm going to smooth it out, raise it up a tiny bit. That's probably a little bit too high. I'll probably come back to that. I'm going to dip it down again, and then again show that this piece of land is just surrounded by rock. So it's a big rock over here on the right hand side, and then I'm going to try my best to try and allude to some of those rocks here. Don't go too mad though. You want to somewhat have a bit more of a horizontal line than anything, but just sort of an uneven sort of shape to the bottom will look great, and drag and drop your color in. Now you may have a gap. So I'm looking at mine, I can see a gap just there. I'll drag and drop the color in. There we go. So we've got a rock over there on the right hand side on its own. The only thing I don't like is that tiny little bit on the end. So I could either straighten that up with a little bit more color, and that should be enough. Awesome. So we've got our land. Again, I'm probably going to go ahead and grab my eraser. I will tap on the eraser, and I will go to something like calligraphy and the monoline brush. And I just want to trim the top of that off a little bit. It's a little bit too high because we've got our tree to introduce, of course. So I'm going to go ahead and just trim that down. So from there, we are going to create our tree. So I'm going to create another new layer. I'm going to go to my brush. I'm going to tap on my brush, and I'm going to change it. I'm going to go to inking and the syrup brush. The size can probably be set to around about, say, 11%. So I'm going to go ahead and draw in the tree trunk, and that's going to have a bit of a curve to it. So I want to have a curve that kind of runs here. And then from there, I'm going to go ahead and just draw in some bumps and lumps of the bottom of the tree as it connects onto the land. And you can always adjust this shape in a second anyway. I'm just going to bring that round a little bit more. I'm going to keep it a little bit thinner than what I normally would do with the kind of tree trunk. I usually like to really chunk them out quite a bit. And then from there, we're going to start drawing in some branches. I'm focusing over here because I'm going to create a lovely little S-bend, and then I'm just going to allow the pen to get really light with my pressure and let it fade off. And then from there, I'll create some branches, of course. And then we'll go ahead and let's think about adding in another one that runs all the way, say, up here. And look at how light I let my pressure get right towards the end, just so that we've got some really awesome, just little sort of very uneven, very wobbly looking branches in there. I'm going to run this one really high up. I'm going to let that come a little bit further down. And from there, I'm going to also create like a bit of a spin off from there and come across. But I don't want it to look too similar to that side. So I do need to have some, maybe a little bit more of an angular shape, a little bit more straight out like that. But it's up to you. You can really have some fun with it. You can make it go up a tiny bit if you'd rather first, and then let it come out like that. A couple of little bits on the end. Lovely. Let's thicken that up a little bit more. I want to make sure that these ones, though, they don't have a certain sort of style that I normally do. I want all of the branches here to look like they kind of break off from the main root, and then from there they will get really, really thin. They're not, you know, thick branch avenues to just break off from each other. As I always say with trees, just make sure your branches overlap. Just make sure they overlap. Have a couple that just literally run across each other. It shows that it's not a flat object. I say the same thing every time because I like to draw trees quite a lot at the minute. It's just something that I want to make sure is ingrained in me and ingrained in you when you think about doing these things. You don't want to just do something and not have a plan as such, or at least an idea as to what we want to try and do. Over time, that's something that you do build up. But as we are sort of learning on our journeys, it's good to just remember what sort of mini things here and there can really make your design look really effective. And I'm just going to literally just really, really light pressure now. I'm just going to run some random little wiggles in here. They don't have to even connect to a branch necessarily either. They can just break off a little something underneath, maybe a little something over there. Don't sort of overthink it. Just let tiny little sort of wiggles and tremors there in your branches. Lovely. Little something like that. And that should be just enough for our tree. to have something interesting to look at. Awesome. So we've got our tree trunk. Of course, now we need to start detailing the land before we fill in the tree. So we're going to go to our layers. We're going to go down to this piece here. I'm going to create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it. I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to go ahead and introduce some of the brown tones to this piece of land. Now I'm going to start off with this color here, top of the 6th column. I'm going to go to my brush and switch it back to airbrushing and the soft brush. And I'm just going to very lightly just sort of lay in a bit of color. Now watch where I'm putting it though. I'm kind of wrapping it round here up towards the top area. And then I'm going to leave big gaps where I want to leave like areas for rocks to rise up onto this land. We also don't want to add a lot. It's really, really meant to be subtle because of course we're backlit in this design. So this area here would somewhat be in silhouette. So with that done, we'll go ahead and create another new layer, tap on it, clipping mask it. We're going to go to our colors and grab the middle color in the first column. Your brush wants to be set to something that you can add some texture to the rocks. Now I'm going to go to textures and the signet brush. I've got the opacity set to 80% and the size will probably be around about 1 to 2%. What I want you to do is start drawing in some rocks. Now just for the sake of the video and you being able to see it, I'm going to double tap in the top left to select white so that you can see my rocks, and then in a minute I will lower the opacity. So for example, over here on the left hand side, I'm going to just detail the top. Now it's going to be a bit tricky for me to do necessarily because I've got white compared to grey. So you'll be able to just layer in the colour correctly as it should be. I'm looking for values now. I'm looking for white and I'm looking for where the grey tones are. So a little bit of texture there. Notice how I don't run all the way down to the water's edge. We don't need to do that necessarily. I'm going to remember that the lighting's over here but coming from behind. So I can go ahead and maybe just sort of patch in a little area of detail there. Maybe there's some unevenness to the rock and we can still add in texture to the rock itself, but we're trying to make sure that the brightest values are over on the opposite side when that light's going to come through. And we will be able to emphasize that again shortly. Now I'm going to go lightly in here and just sort of create some rocks. You can change up your brush size to like a smaller 2% maybe, and this, that, and the other. You know, all the different things that we've always learned throughout these tutorials, that you can change up your brush size, all the variation that I want you to put into your work. I want you to be able to do something rogue and interesting and brave. I'm going to go along here now, creating the kind of outline of a big, big rock here, like as if there's one in this area here. I'm going to set the brush size about 3%. And I'm just going to add in a bit of sort of surface level grey to it. What will be grey, of course. And like a big, maybe like a big streak across it as it runs down. Or something like that. And then we need to just keep going all the way across, basically. So just identifying rocks. Now, of course, when you get over to this side, the rules change, of course, because the lighting's now over on the left. So you brighten up the left-hand side of the rock that you want to put in there. I'm going to add in a nice big like fascia to this, and then let the other side get a little bit lighter, a little bit of texture, but nothing too much. And again, maybe a little bit running right down to the water's edge. You don't have to fill in everywhere either. You could just literally add in a few scrapes and bumps and lumps in here to identify maybe a few very, very, very small rocks, and keep the opacity really, really light if you can. So I'm probably going to have to revisit mine just because I'm doing it in white for you, but this is roughly what we want to go for. Now what I can do is, now that I've kind of shown you what we're doing, I will go to the layer and tap on it and alpha lock it. I'll go to my color and switch it to the correct one, which is the middle of that first column, and tap on the layer and fill it. So now you should be able to see exactly what I'm seeing, for the sake that I've turned off the alpha lock, how dark we are here. So now I can probably start to work out, okay, I can press a lot firmer in here now and really try and identify some of these rocks. Now we do have a lighter tone to be adding in shortly. So for a minute, you just want to get this in probably at 100% now, and just start getting some color in there, getting some texture in there, getting in some rocks. Now I want them all to raise really high up towards the grassy land up there. So I'm going to go ahead and draw in a massive big boulder there, along there, huge boulder like that, and then go from there. Who else heard donkey then from Shrek? Because that's what I heard as I said that in my head. That definitely sounded like donkey. What a film. So let's keep going. And what we're going to also do is in a minute introduce some shadow tones back in here. So this won't be your be all and end all of this kind of element of adding in the stones and the rocks around the ground here. So just a few nods to a few stones. That's all we need to do. We don't need to do too much in here. Again, we've got our brighter tones to add in, but if you want to, you can go to town and add in some good amounts of like grey in a rock if you really want to. It's totally up to you. I'm going to go to my colors and grab the bottom of the first column. And we're going to set that brush size a bit smaller, about 1 to 2%, and now start adding in additional tones on top. So for example, now I can start working out, well, where will be my brightest areas? It's definitely going to be in there, along that edge, like I said, and then where that lighting will probably just wrap around the rock potentially. So a little something like this. And we're just going to keep making our way through our rocks here. A little bit on this top edge. We do have an add layer that we will introduce. So for a minute, you can introduce something like this and just give the top edge a little bit of light as if it's going to be casting through the tree shortly, which we'll of course introduce with the light beams. But we'll just add it in. You don't have to add it in everywhere, you know, just a little bit on that surface of that rock will do. A little something over here, definitely some over here though, because this rock is very much in the sort of limelight of the sunlight, which is going to make its way around there. And add some down the end, maybe a couple of light details, maybe a little bit on this one here too. I'm going to bring that brush size down to a very small 1% and try and just add in some really fine levels of edge to it. So I'm going to really sharpen up some of the edges on there. So it's not quite a sort of large brush stroke, it's a little bit thinner now, and I'm capturing some of the edging of the shape. So a little something like that along there. Maybe a couple of streaks across the rock or two, a little something like this, and then maybe a little dash across there like that. Now, as I mentioned, you can also go ahead and go to your colors and grab the top color in the first column and set the brush size to like a 1 or 2%. And then you can break down some of those lines. So just draw them back in with a nice dark tone and introduce new tones, but in shadow form. So I can go ahead and just cut straight across some of those, introducing shadows and grooves into the rock now that otherwise are a bit tricky to draw like with just the highlight tones. So you can get in there and break down some of those shapes. I think they look amazing when you do this because you really do sacrifice so much to the shadows and allow your rock to have grooves all over it. Rocks can be really tricky to draw anyway. So I always like to draw like avenues like this that just break down. So I'll draw like a line across, I'll draw a line that pivots off from there, and then I'll just draw even more just to show all the cracks and the breakdown of the rock over time. And we want to be bold, we want to be brave with our decisions in here. Just making a cut across like this. Now hopefully that comes across on camera, but we should now have a nice little rocky edge to our land. Now because we do have that rocky edge, we can also now go ahead and go to our layers and create another new layer, tap on it. We can go ahead and clipping mask it also. We can go to our colors and we can grab, say, the orange at the top of the second column. I'd bring the opacity down to 80% and the size to around about 2, and you can just very lightly with your Signet brush now start adding in some detail in the ground. Now one thing I want you to avoid is, notice if I quickly draw underneath the tree, I don't want to see any of that. That wants to be complete darkness in this area behind the tree. So I want to just add in patches and light areas of pressure. Just gone a tad smaller with the brush size. Just a few areas and speckles in the ground here of some detail. I can bring the opacity down to 60% and make the brush size a bit bigger. So opacity's gone down, the brush size went up, just so I can patch in some nice orangey tone along the ground here, especially on this edge as well. This edge right here, the very edge of the land, likewise over there, the sun is going to kiss. So we're fine to add some color there. Here, you want to think about, can I just leave a little bit of it? I don't want to get too close to these rocks. I want to have a bit of a gap. If you do get too close to them though, you can just use your eraser just to get, tidy up any edges. So if you see any overlap, just grab your eraser, set it to, say, airbrushing and a soft brush. Just tidy up this edge. There we go. Just so you don't want any orange on top of the rock. You can have it right up against it though, that's perfectly fine, but you want to keep it nice and sort of subtle like that. Let's start adding in some detail to the tree, because then we can start to really pump out some more color in the land should we feel it's necessary. So we're going to go ahead and go in front of the tree itself. We're going to create a new layer. we're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the middle color in the second column. Your brush wants to be set to the option of, we're going to go into organic. We're going to use the snow gum brush. I will set the opacity to, I think we need to initially start off quite strong. So I'm going to go about 95%. Size can be around about 2%. And we're just going to add in some leaves, of course. Now you want to vary your size from 2 to 4%. It's pressure sensitive anyway, so if you can get away with pressing really lightly, you'll be fine. You can do it a little bit quicker. Now we want to also remember this is an autumnal scene, so we do not need to sort of worry too much about adding in a lot of coverage. We want to make sure it's got a little bit of scarcity to it in certain areas. Gaps around about where your sun is, so just here, roughly where that dot is, we want to somewhat imagine that the light, of course, is going to come through here at some point. So we want to leave some gaps just to aid us. Otherwise, we'll just have to maybe delete some areas here later. So I'm just going to go along here. I'm imagining, of course, that the branches are just the avenues, so I can go beyond those shapes a little bit. I don't have to necessarily, run just along the branch and that's it. I can run a little bit further down. I can go a little bit higher up. I can go all the way back in towards the base of the tree. Here, just because there's no branch doesn't mean I don't have to add any content there. It's just we don't need a branch to necessarily tell us that. Your brain will do the sort of filling in of all the logic necessarily a lot of the time. Especially if you showed this to someone who'd never seen it before, they wouldn't even question it. It'd just be, yep, there must be a branch there. That's all it needs to be. So just making my way through, creating these kind of bundles and kind of stacks of the color. Trying to keep my sort of brush pressure fairly heavy to start with, just so that in a minute I can get in there with a slightly smaller brush size. So I can go say down to 2%, get in some of those edges and just add in a few more very fine areas of leaves in there. I can create these little kind of flick offs at the end just to take the shape up and away from the tree a little bit more. Now yours will probably look different to mine, but that's not a bad thing. Everyone's will look slightly different to each other, and that is a good thing. It's very normal to see that as well. You're doing slightly different pressure to me. I'm doing slightly different pressure to you, of course. And so with our pen, we're going to end up creating different levels of content. I'm just going to add in a few leaves there across the middle. I just want to get to a certain level of coverage, which I think I'm almost at already. I can just create a few little flick offs, I think, at the top here. So I'm pressing really firm, but with a slightly smaller brush size. And then in certain areas, I'm just going to pack them in a little bit more. So create like a good level of kind of density in certain areas with the very, very small brush size. Just where I feel like I want to create those little clusters of the leaves. And this is why we added in those lighting effects in the background, because it helps your tree stand off now from the background, because those colors are a little bit faded now. We've got our sharp elements right at the front here, nicely in detail, and they're nice and sharp, of course. We've got just a little bit of contrast can help your design a huge amount. Now, I think we are pretty much there. I'm just going to rough up the edges at the top here with just a few stray little sort of dashes. One of those was a little bit too far. And then just a few more at the very, very top. We want the tree to go in lots of different avenues and angles, etc. So a couple of rogue little taps here and there. There we go. Awesome. So at this point, we then want to go ahead and start adding in some extra color. So we're going to go to the layer and tap on it and alpha lock it, because we don't want to add any more leaves to this. We want to just color in the leaves that we've already got. So we're going to go to our colors and grab the bottom color in that second column. And we're going to wiggle our pen through now with the 4% brush size to just add in some yellow tones. So maybe if you see that, if I just press really firm, I'm just wiggling it quickly through here and a little bit maybe towards this kind of middle area where our sunlight's going to beam through. So just add in like a few areas here towards the middle with a little bit more yellow tone, maybe a little bit of yellow at the bottom there, towards the underside of that kind of cluster over there. Likewise, maybe a little bit more yellow over there as well. And maybe a little bit on the edges. From there, we'll go to our colors and grab the top color in that column. So top of the second column there. And then we're going to add in some darker tones. So maybe you want to go to a 2%, but press really firm. And then in certain areas here, just patch in some darker tone in there. So this just helps add in that variation that we need to make it look more realistic. The tones are very close, but look at the difference between these two areas now. There's a nice amount of variation in there. And also because we are behind the subject that is being lit from behind as well, we want to just have a little bit of darkness in here, especially towards the top, just to sort of make sure we're abiding by the fact that, of course, we know this is backlit. So just adding in a little bit more darkness in there. Feel free, though, to switch it back to, say, the original color or even the yellow, and then go back in and add in a couple of dashes just to break up those really dark tones. But we just want to make sure we've got some of those in there. And then I'm going to go to my layers. I'm going to create another new layer. I'm going to go to my colors and grab the color here, top of the third column. Brush wants to be set to Snow Gum, and we're still going to be using that at around about that 4% range. I just want to go behind some of these clusters and add in a light amount of blue to just, again, emphasize that we are behind the subject. We know it's being backlit. Just a little bit of color, especially maybe up towards the top areas. Just a little bit of darkness in behind should aid us later. And then maybe just the tiniest little bit, say, along some of these as well. Just a few little sort of specks of the blue on the rear will just look really good later on. Now, let's just carry on with the design because we've got some more effects that we'll introduce on those areas later. For now, I want to go ahead and get my reflection in. So what we're going to do is we're going to go from left to right on all of these layers up here for our main subject area and group them together. We'll just rename the group and call it subject. We will go ahead and hold down on the tick for the group. That means it's just that that's been left. Swipe down with 3 fingers and go copy all. We'll go back to our layers. We'll hold down on the tick again. Now I want to tap on the hills group here, create a new layer, then swipe down with 3 fingers and go to paste. Flip it vertically and drag it down until the ends of the land on either side are touching. That's fine. I don't mind that little bit of overhang. That looks pretty cool. I'll tap on my cursor when I'm done. I'm then going to go to my adjustments. I'm going to go to motion blur. I'm going to drag down in a vertical fashion. And I think around about the 20% range there does look really cool. I think I'm going to roll with that around about 20. You could probably go a bit higher than that if you wanted to. I'm going to go 23 then. Dragging down in a vertical fashion and tap on my adjustments when I'm done. I'm then going to go ahead and create a new layer in front of the one we're working on. So we're just outside the subject group now. We've just got these areas here. Now on this layer, we're going to go to our colors. We're going to grab the color in the top right of the palette. I'm going to go to my brush and make sure it's set to textures and the signet brush. I'll set the opacity to 80%. The size wants to be around about 1 to 2. And all I'm going to do is just draw in some sort of horizontal kind of scrapes. Now they're very, very, very light at the minute and I can press really firm, but I want to have that level of control, as I always like to say. You want to be in control of the lines. And I'm just going to run some like off the end here to show that the water's maybe coming this way down and hitting the edge of this island that we've just made. I'm going to keep my brush really, really, really light and very scratchy almost. In fact, if anything, you could tap on the layer and add the drawing assist. That way you can only draw horizontally and that takes a little bit less effort to do them. So a few little scrapes going a little bit further back in behind our little piece of land. And then as you get a little bit closer, make the brush size a bit bigger. Go up to around about 2% and just create a few very, very simple ripples in there. Don't do too much. Just add in a few. It breaks down this shadow and it just makes us see that, oh, it is actually a reflection. There's a water surface there. Just a little something like this. Maybe a little something around the edge of the land as well. A couple of little, maybe over here, the current is so strong that it creates like an additional bit of color out there. I'm just tapping a few times. Occasionally they may layer up on top of each other, just keeping it nice and simple where possible. And there we go. We should have a lovely little bit of a reflection. Now at this point, I want to add in the lighting because then that will help us then go ahead and start to think about adding in further highlights to the rest of the design. So what we're going to do is we are going to go in front of our subject group up here, create a new layer. We're going to stick with the same color. So it's the color in the top right of the palette. We're going to go to our brush and we are going to go to airbrushing and the soft brush. Now I'm going to go back to the layer. I'm going to tap on it and change its blend mode to add. I'm going to bring the opacity down to 70%. I'm going to make sure my brush is set to around about, say, 4%, although that is going to vary quite a lot. Now our sun is just peeking up here. Now you can pick an angle. You can pick slightly off to the right. You can pick like here if you want, which is exactly what I'm going to do. And I'm going to draw in some lines that are making their way through the tree. So for example, I'm going to just run a line across there. It's important that you draw in sort of straight lines as well. And you want to just pivot out from there. You can bring your brush size down to like a 2%. Now, one thing you can do, if that's something you're going to struggle with, go to your actions and go to edit the drawing guide that we created earlier, but change it to the option of perspective. Then you just need to tell the app where the perspective is. So I'm going to tap here and then hit done. And then if we go back to the layer and we tap on it and you make it use the drawing assist, what that'll allow you to do is that'll allow you to draw the lines out only along those lines here. So I can draw in a few straight lines. I'm going to vary my brush size, as I mentioned. I'm going to have a few that are like fairly close to each other, but I'm pointing all the way into that point there. And you can brighten that up in there as well. You can punch that out a bit more. I'm going to set the brush size to a little bit smaller. I want to have some really thin rays that come through as well. Now, sometimes it's hard to start there. So start out here, make your way in towards it like that. And then you'll end up with these beautiful light rays making their way through. I think this is such a pretty effect. We can always fade them out on the ends in a minute if they're getting a little bit too, they come to a point like that. And you just want to keep going really until you've made a good amount of progress on just showing how that lighting makes its way through the tree. Now that one there looked like it didn't really fit too well. So I'm going to go for a larger one, around about 4% for the left-hand side. And just see if I can add that in. Now I want to vary up my pressure though, because I don't want the lines to be too bold. I don't want them to be too bold at the beginning. And then I'm also going to go ahead and draw in a few little small ones, maybe around about 2% that just run, say, through here. I'm going to go really small, 1 to 2%, and draw in another one that makes its way through. And just see if you can find an angle with yours that makes sense. Don't do too many of them. You don't need to do too many. It's always really hard to try and limit yourself, really. But what I urge you to then do is get a 6% and find a beam or one that you really like the look of. For example, I like this one here. I'm just going to make this one a little bit wider and just fade it a bit more like that. So I've got a nice blanket beam almost coming through. And then I can go to my layer and turn off the drawing guide, because then I can see my lines and where they're coming from and where they bleed through. And then because if we go to the layer, we tap on it and turn off the drawing assist, we can also go ahead then and just make sure that that sun and that central area is a little bit brighter. You can spread out the color a bit more up towards the top in the tree as well. So it's a little bit more like this. Now, I said earlier on that I set it to 70%. You may need to vary that. You may need to bring that down. We don't want it to be too crazy. I'm probably going to drop mine down to about 55%, just so it's not too much. And then grab your eraser also. Set your eraser to something like 11% and just fade out the ends of some of those beams if they come to too much of a solid end and they don't make it quite towards the end of the canvas. That's fine. Just a little something like this should look really pretty. Now it's at this point where, because we've done the light beams now, we can also make some further adjustments to our subject and the leaves. So I can go ahead and where we've got our layer here for our leaves, we'll tap on it and turn off the alpha lock. We're going to swipe it to the left and duplicate it. The bottom one out the two, we're going to go to our adjustments. We're going to go to Gaussian blur. We're going to zoom in because we're just going to blur out the leaves in behind. Now, we don't want to do this massively. I think a 2% Gaussian blur will look really good. Then tap on your adjustments when you're done. Then go to the layer, tap on it and bring its opacity down to 50%. Then we want to go to the one above. We want to go ahead and go to our adjustments and Gaussian blur that, but just to like a 1%, 1 to 2. You can see your percentage at the top there. We're then going to tap on our adjustments. We're going to tap on it again. We're going to go to hue, saturation and brightness. And now because we've got our brightest values, we now can bring them down a little bit. And I'm going to bring it down to about 41% there to add in some really nice dark leaves. Now, we know that we've got a nice pretty light source, but we also need to abide by the fact that they would be sort of quite dark. So this is up to you on how much you want to do this. Potentially, you may want to sort of add some more color in this area, or not go as low as that. You can go a little bit higher. 42, 41% looks pretty good for me. So I'm going to tap on my adjustments when I'm done. I've got a really lovely dark tone there, which is giving us some nice shadows. Now we've got a couple of final little things to do. We can go up to the very top of our design, create a new layer, go to your colors. Let's go ahead and grab the color here. So it's the top of the third column from the right. Your brush wants to be soft airbrush still under airbrushing, and we'll set the size to around about, say, 20%, I reckon. We're going to go around in a bit of a vignette around our design. So I'm just going to go around the very edge of the frame, just darkening it up along the edges, just a little bit darker. Make sure it's even all the way around though. And then just set the blend mode of that from normal to the option of overlay. Then we've got a couple of things we can also do is, because we've now got our bright light source, we can also go ahead and add some extra effects to the land, etc. here. So for example, here, where we've got our stack to the land, I'm going to create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it. Change the blend mode from normal to the option of, we'll change it to add, but we'll bring the opacity down. I was one step ahead of myself. So I've set the blend mode to add, and I've brought the opacity down to about 50% to get started with. I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to go ahead and let's grab the tone here, bottom of the 6th column. Your brush, you can keep it as a soft airbrush if you like, but you want to make it nice and small, about 2%. And then you just want to add in a bit of a brighter edge to here. In fact, I'm going to change the color to the middle of the far right column, so I can get a bit more of a whiter tone in here. I can run that across there. And I just want to bring the brush size up just a little bit more, just so I can add in some bright edge onto the edge of the land to show that the sunlight is catching. It's just brightening up our land from behind. I've got to do the same over here. And we can just add a tiny bit on the end there. In fact, we can go to our brush. We can change it to the option of textures in the signet again. With a brush size of say 1 to 2%, 80% opacity again. Just wiggle your pen through here now and just create variety and texture to the ground and show like a few areas that are catching some light. Just a little something like that is enough just to give us a little bit something else to look at. A few extra patches in the ground, just something simple, just a few little simple squiggles. And then also you may just about want to get onto some of these rocks with a very small brush size of like a 1% and just add in the brightest edge now at the top where that lighting is just coming through. It will make a big difference. It will just sharpen it up, especially if you've got the really small brush size now. Just add in a little bit of a brighter spot on some of them, especially these ones on the edges. Just that little bit of edge highlighting on there. That's nice and sharp, nice and bright, just showing how that sun is landing on a few of those rocks. Over here especially, this one over here is pretty much prime time for some sunlight because it's right in the way. Add in a bit there, and then maybe a little bit down its edge as well. Just brightening it up a tiny bit. Now what we can also go ahead and do is just go ahead and add a tiny bit of detail to the tree. We can tap on the tree. You can create a new layer in front of it, tap on it and clipping mask it to the tree just in case you want to change it. Set the brush size to something nice and small, 1 to 2% again. And you can just rush down the end here, brush down the end here, not rush, take your time. 1% just down the end here. A few little branches, just showing how a few of those branches are just catching a little bit of sunlight. Just a little something, don't overdo it, keep your pressure nice and light so you can build up a few mid-tones in there as well. A little bit on the top surface of the roots down there. Just give you something a little bit more interesting to look at. Lovely. And then along some of those branches like so. Now the only thing I'm thinking looking at mine is I'd probably want to add a bit more yellow to the leaves. I could go back to this layer here, the slightly darker one on the top, and tap on it and alpha lock it. Or I could create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it and change the blend mode to add. And I think I'll do that instead. So I'll add the add blend mode. I'll set the color to the yellow at the bottom of the 2nd column, and the brush can go back to organic and snow gum. These are changes, by the way, that you probably might not have to do, but I'm just adding it in here just so I can add in a few extra tones. So I'm going to bring the opacity down to 52%, 4% brush size. I'm just going to see if I can add in where I know that light source is beaming through. Can I just, add in a few little specks here and there of leaves that are really, really bright, just expressing that sunlight and how it's breaking through into our scene, and just add in a bit more color. Lovely. Oh, that's nice. That's nice and pretty underneath that one there, but also on the top of that one, right over onto the end as well. The ends of some of the branches are not obscured by the branch above, are they? So they could probably have a little bit of lighting on them. And because we're at a low opacity, you can always go back over yourself a few times if you feel like you want to really go for it. A little something like that in the middle. Just touching it up. Just these little extra touches right at the end sometimes can do a massive amount for your full design. And the only other thing you also might want to do as well is your beams here at the top that we added in. You may potentially, if you've added them in, they're really thick and solid, you may want to go to adjustments and Gaussian blur and just fade them out a little bit so they're not super solid. So like a 4% Gaussian blur will make all of the difference. You can tap on the screen and then you'll get this preview button. You can tap on it and then just see the difference between with and without, and just take a look at the beams and see how they start to diffuse. You may want to go even higher, but I'm going to go to a 4%, I think, a nice little extra touch at the end. Tap on my adjustments when I'm done. I'm going to pinch with 2 fingers, go full screen with 4, and we end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial. As always, make sure to tag me in your finished creations wherever you decide to share them. And if you could do me a massive favor and subscribe to the channel, that'd be amazing. I know a lot of people that watch this channel are not subscribed, and you might not be. So make sure to hit that subscribe button down below and show your support for the work that I do here. And if you want even more tutorials from me, come and join me over on Patreon, where my Patreon now has a catalog of well over 120 Patreon exclusive tutorials. You need to be a supporter over there to get access to all of those tutorials. And you can see every single one of the designs that I've published there on my website before you join. And that way you can tell if the content is for you or not, and you can take a good old browse at the content ready for when you join. So make sure to check that out using the link in the description down below. And if you like this video here on YouTube, you will love this one on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.